Goeiedag. Vandaag gaan we weer eens praten over Feng Shui. Misschien kent u het als Feng Shui, want zo schrijf je het, maar je spreekt het op zijn Chinees, neem maar aan, uit als Feng Shui. We praten met Rodger Green. Hij is Feng Shui leraar, maar ook iemand die over de hele wereld daar seminars over geeft, instituten. En hij heeft iets heel bijzonders gedaan. Hij heeft namelijk het zuidelijk halfrond, waar de sterren tenslotte anders staan, ook zeg maar in Feng Shui termen in kaart gebracht. Welkom, Rodger. To start with Feng Shui, why do we say Feng Shui and not Feng Shui?
Well, there's actually a couple of ways you can pronounce it, depending on where you are from China. I don't think it's so important how you pronounce this word, because even the Japanese call it Feng Shui, and the Koreans pronounce it different as well. I think it's more important to know what the words stand for. They translate as wind and water. So it's just the Chinese viewpoint of the energetics of nature applied to the environment and applied to architecture and design. So that's what the meaning of the word means, Feng Shui.
For me, it always feels like the invisible force fields that we create, or that nature creates in situations, and that we can create in buildings, and therefore we can recreate or change or adapt to our changing needs, or the feeling that this house is not really what we want it to be.
Yes, it's all of that. For instance, in the word Feng Shui, you have this concept of the wind, which is invisible, and the water, which is visible. So that's actually another name for Yin and Yang. So Feng Shui is the art of using the science and the art of the cosmos and the metaphysical understanding that the Chinese had developed, but you're applying that to the physical environment of the home or the business and so forth. So you get this sort of dynamic that you play with. You play with the, as you say, the sort of the force field of the house, or the force field of the environment, but as well as you're playing with the tangible side. And Feng Shui is the art of bringing those two together.
Okay. Now, another word that comes up is Tai Chi, which is the art of moving your body within and with the energy that is in it. And
Sure.
And is there a relationship with Feng Shui?
Absolutely. Feng Shui is part of a family of modalities that the ancient Taoists, the word Taoist is sort of
Again, a word that some people will read as Tao. Yes?
Yeah,
T-A-O.
but it's actually pronounced
it's called Tao. Yes.
Tao. The Chinese don't really have the T sound, it's more the Tao. So it's actually the better translation of that is D-A-O, Tao. And so there was the early Chinese people, the Taoists, they established like a very deep understanding of the energetics of the body. So hence we have acupuncture and Chinese medicine. They also developed things like Qigong and Tai Chi, and they also developed their metaphysical understanding. Hence we have the book of the I Ching, and their environmental work and the architectural work that they developed was Feng Shui. So all of those groups of modality come from the same source. They came from the Taoist understanding of the universe, the environment.
Could you
and
say
the
it
human.
has to do with the connectedness, or could you say it's another dimension that we not normally are aware of?
In one sense, in the West, we've been very material in our sense of being, and we have a very sort of materialistic perception of our environment. So in one sense you could say, yes, it starts to explore the other dimension, more like the invisible energies that we experience.
You mean the ghost and stuff like that?
Oh, that's part of it as well, but also,
The spirits is a better word. Maybe.
Yeah, that's certainly part of it, that it has an understanding of the vibrational world, or the spirit world, if you like, as well as the tangible world.
Yeah. But so within all these disciplines, modalities is a good word, the basis is that there is a connectedness between all things.
Yeah, there's no separation.
There's no separation.
Yeah.
What happens to me here now has influence on whatever faraway planet.
Yeah.
Yes, and vice versa.
For instance, in Jungian psychology, he called it that synchronicity. For instance, the book, the I Ching, which is you could call the Bible of all of the Oriental arts, that's based on that precise concept that there's no separation. You're one with the universe. But we need a little key to understand that. We need to find out what's, perhaps more appropriate in certain situations to, help us guide us through our life and so forth. So that's why the Taoists developed these modalities, be it for healing or architecture or understanding our universe.
Now, Feng Shui is now, even I hear it in political circles in Amsterdam, that to set up the city, they think about those age-old rules about how the energy should work. Yes, I think that putting a dam in a river is not the best thing to start with, is it?
Are you talking about the
Amsterdam? Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. They were very clever. The sort of the ancestors of this land. They figured out some very clever things about how to create more land chi out of the water, the excess water chi. So they actually took control of the water chi of this region, and through a clever system of canals and dams and so forth, they were able to create an environment that humans could actually live. In fact, that's the sort of the way the Chinese civilization started many thousands of years ago. They also took control of the Yellow River. The early development of civilization in China was around the Yellow River, where the ancient sages were able to control the rivers because there was so much flooding happening. So that was basically our ancestral awareness of how to kind of work with nature, not to go against it, and how to sort of take control of some of these environmental factors to make it more appropriate for human living.
Okay, but now building a dam or even building a house is a simple construction. I mean, you make a roof and stuff like that. But in Feng Shui, it's a little bit more esoteric in the sense that you apply principles and schematics that are not, would we say, logical at the first sight.
Okay, well, at first sight, for the person who doesn't know too much about Feng Shui, the language is different, so therefore it sounds a little bit mysterious. Sometimes people don't really know what Yin and Yang's about, but in fact, Yin and Yang's a very logical tool, and it's a very rational tool. And the thing is about Feng Shui is that the design principles have to work because they come from a time where, you needed to have the maximum amount of, sun because you lived in a very cold climate. And they came from a time where people really understood survival, and they really understood, what the design of shelter was all about. So it comes from an indigenous understanding, right? So in actual fact, there's a strong logic to Feng Shui design. The first thing that you do in Feng Shui design is think about the sun's pattern. And in fact,
where the sun comes up and goes down.
The east, and where it goes high in the sky, the south, where it sinks, and where the sky, the sun goes to the north. So that simply is yin and yang. The colder part of your house is the more yin side. The warmer part of your house is the more yang side. And then what the Taoists did is they just gave that like a little energy notation. They used a solid line and a broken line, and that's where the 8 trigrams have come from.
Yeah, and then we're talking about like the I Ching, what we have here.
Exactly.
The patterns in the back here, yeah?
Exactly.
The trigrams, and you can make even more finer distinction with double trigrams.
These trigrams is just more detail of the yin and yang energetics, summer, winter, south, north, east, west. It just gives us more detail to apply.
It's a duality that we live with. But then the concept that are a little bit harder to grasp is that in a house there's a corner for friendship and there's a corner for economics, say for riches, for money. Would you say that also has a logical basis, that in a situation where we're living in a tent or a yurt or some kind of construction, that was the logical place where the foreigner would come in because the wind was always blowing from that side?
Yeah? Exactly. For instance, all indigenous design was based on that. For instance, the villages of India, they put the doorways and the windows and where the kitchen was in a very appropriate place for the amount of heat in that part of the house, or where the main breezes would come from, so that they blew all the the fumes from the cooking. So there's a real common sense level to Feng Shui. But also getting back to your question about, well, what about different corners and the meanings of different directions and so forth? What the Taoists figured out, they used what's called associative thinking. Now in the West, we're not so used to associative thinking. We're more used to analytical thinking, where we take something and we break it down into all of its various pieces, and we don't really see that in relationship to the whole. Whereas what more ancient people did, they began with the whole, and then they saw the sort of energetics associations that they had between each other. So, for instance, in Chinese medicine, these 8 trigrams also energetically represent the nature and the function of the various organs. They begin to represent certain times of the day and seasonal aspects, and they start to represent certain colours, certain emotions, certain sort of psychological ways of being. So they had like a large mandala of all of the, the psychological attributes, as well as like a small mandala.
So what you're saying that all things in nature, be they idealistic like numbers and colors and and be they factual like sun and the moon coming up,
there's a pattern to that.
There's a pattern, and the pattern could be described as frequencies or octaves or I Ching hexagrams or trigrams. So there is an order to the universe that is not the logical order. It's not the 1 + 1 is 2 order. It's the 1 + 1 is sometimes something else order.
Yeah, sure.
A magical order, you could say.
There is a sense of mystery to this, but there's also the point there's also like Yin and Yang is actually a very rational tool, and they use that rational. It's not this kind of rationale that we're used to in the West, but it's in its own language. It is a very rational tool because, for instance, just needs positive and negative. Yin and Yang. It's like a binary code, just like like a computer language. It relies on plus and negative, or the masculine principle and the feminine principle. So it has that logic to it, but yes, that logic it is applied to more, the vibrational world that, for instance, the Western is not so tuned into, but it's also applied to the, the physical world. Right?
Talking about physics, when we talk about Feng Shui, people always point to Hong Kong super buildings. They've built huge banks, and they say, this is all laid out according to Feng Shui principles. And the building masters have taken the same principle, the age-old principle that were used for temples in modern banking and in buildings where you use computers. Is that appropriate?
It is appropriate because Feng Shui is all about energy, and life is about energy, and also business is about energy. So, for instance, you referred to Hong Kong. Like in Hong Kong and Taiwan, of course, they're very sort of interested in Feng Shui because they knew that this was the tool that the ancient people used to establish, good.
Is it the same interest as we have in Volendam wooden shoes that hardly ever anybody wears, but when the tourist comes, we put them on? So is it talk?
No,
is there
it's not applied.
Yeah,
there's a reality. There's not a superficial part. This is life. This is the reality of life, and the reality of life is it's an energetic principle. We live in a vibrational world, right? And so, for instance, they sort of took those same principles that they used for the palaces and they used in agriculture and they used in the villages and just for, the design principles of the home. They took those principles and then they applied them to everything, be it, business or the design of, the building in accordance to where the movement of energy is coming from the water or coming from the hills or coming from the roads.
Okay, I can understand
it
for traditional things, but take a computer. Would you put a computer on the place where they used to put the Buddha? Or would you put a computer on the place where they would put, say, the water or the economy-related things?
Well, Feng Shui is applied differently, obviously, to different circumstances. You usually don't end up with a computer and a Buddha being too close to one another, right? So, it's used in its appropriateness, so to speak. The Feng Shui of a home, you've got different energetic spots of the home. Like the kitchen kitchen is like what we call more yang, so it has a different type of Feng Shui to the bedroom, which would say is generally more yin function. The function of a home is different to the function of a business, just like the function of a temple.
Does it imply that if you take a computer, which is used for business, let's assume a business computer in your bedroom, that's not a good idea?
Generally not, because you're starting to mix the energies, and then that can cause a lot of sleeping problems and insomnia and so forth.
On the other hand, the home gaming computer, if you take it to the office, is also not a good idea.
Maybe because you don't do any work.
That's not Feng Shui. That's very, very logical. Now listen, lately there has been a surge in interest in Feng Shui. There's many books on the market. You wrote a book about it?
I have. At the moment, the book's in Portuguese and Spanish, because I actually teach a lot in South America, because I've actually developed a whole system of Feng Shui for the Southern Hemisphere. This has never really been done before. The Chinese never really bothered about
Why is it different here?
Because, for instance, our design principles are different. We design towards the north. Our sun pattern, which is what Feng Shui is actually based on, our sun pattern is high to the north. So our architecture in the Southern Hemisphere, we design towards the north.
So
or
you kind of make
people like buying
a mirror
houses.
image.
Like here, yeah, people like to buy houses here that are south orientated, so you get all the the full energy from the sun, and you like to have protection from the cold winds coming from the north and the northeast and so forth. Whereas in Australia and South America and South Africa, of course, our energetics are different. The energy goes in the anti-clockwise direction, whereas in the northern hemisphere it goes in the clockwise direction. Our major
That's
water.
funny. Do you know whether a sink goes in the other direction?
It does. Yeah, that's a scientific fact.
In the north it goes.
Yeah, and
Coriolis
our major
forces and
our major wind patterns are anti-clockwise, and our major ocean currents are anti-clockwise.
So designing in the southern hemisphere is different, and that's what you kind of specialized in.
Yeah.
So you took the
well,
whole.
I've been specializing in what's called classical Feng Shui. And I started to develop this about 12 years ago, before Feng Shui was even popular, because I already had in Australia like a curriculum that was teaching things like, food energetics, Chinese medicine, acupuncture, macrobiotics, shiatsu, all of that. And Feng Shui was part of that.
Chinese stuff.
20 years ago I got interested in this when I was living in...
Eat a lot of Chinese food or what?
Not so much Chinese food, no. But I liked the principles that they developed. I got interested in the I Ching. I liked studying the Yin and Yang aspect and how that could be applied to our daily living and how it helps to secure your health and vitality. It's used a lot in traditional medicine and so forth.
You should say it was... I opened this little fortune cookie and it said... From now on, you will learn Chinese, but it wasn't like that.
It was an intuitive feeling, I think.
Intuitive
feeling. Yeah.
You feel connected to that.
In my teenage years, I was began to be a little bit more interested in the Eastern perspective on things. Like a lot of people in my generation, we started to explore more traditional healing, and we started to explore the Eastern philosophies. At that time, it really had a lot of answers for us. And now, of course, there's a synthesis, a great sort of synthesis of East and West.
Let's take a little bit negative approach that the East has much to offer, and
so is the West.
But the West has to offer, and we are bending sometimes our Western culture, our Christian Judeo traditions into, and we say, now we eat vegetarian, and we become really like Eastern oriented. But is that a good internal match, or is that twisting the soul a bit?
It can be when things get out of balance. For instance, in the West, we took a very materialistic and somewhat aggressive viewpoint of the universe, as well as we had this sort of sense that everything was outside of us. We were very sort of external. We were always looking at the outside world for our answers.
We're looking at the boundaries.
Whereas in the East, they took more of an internal approach. So when things get out of balance, you need the opposite. So in my generation, we were more interested in exploring the opposites that the Eastern culture had developed that we weren't finding in our own culture. Now that's not to say that I'm a Chinese person, but I like to explore those energetics and those universal principles that then I can reapply to my culture or reapply to the health of my family and my community and so forth. Right? Creates a balance.
So I had a conversation a while ago with someone who said that our cultures will go in a direction where North America and Russia will form one block, and where Asia and the more Pacific coast will form a block. Would you think that different attitude of the East versus the West, of on one hand what I feel is more separational thinking, me versus you, versus the Eastern inclusion?
Well, I think what we're seeing is we're living in a very dynamic time. I don't think we're seeing more separation. I think we're seeing more and more coming together. And we're seeing, for instance, the global economy and all those economic forces. We're seeing sort of like the mixture of the, as you mentioned before, the Christian tradition with the more Eastern traditions. And we live in a very dynamic time where we're able to actually mix those philosophies into it's something like a new philosophy. A new that sort of extracts, the deep meanings from the West and also the deeper meanings from the East, and it's sort of like creating a new child in philosophical terms. So I think I don't see, more separation in that. I see the world and world coming a lot more closer to each other again. We've been separated for many, many thousands of years, but now this is like coming back together again.
Okay. Well, coming back, I'm very interested in the I Ching because. As Feng Shui is now accepted as a rational thinking. I mean, okay, you want to design a house. This is a set of design principles, and everybody can watch or look at the internet and find. There's lots of books about it. There's lots of information. There's people teaching courses about Feng Shui. It's more of it's one design philosophy. Yeah, the other design philosophy might be chaotic, and you say. They call it eclectic, and you throw all the stuff around and do what you like. Sometimes with very good results too.
Yeah, absolutely.
By chance. But the I Ching is far more esoteric in the sense that there is a system that gives us guidelines about our life with no apparent connection to reality, in the sense that I throw a few coins, which gives me one of these patterns here, yes, a hexagram pattern, which I look up in the book, and it says that, and I just happen to have one book here, and it says, well, the 64th hexagram tells you this.
Okay, well, the book is considered the book of change. That's the way it's translated. In actual fact, it has a lot of mathematical principles to it. There's even Chinese scholars that have formulated the whole DNA around the 64 changes. These mathematical principles, yes, you might say you get one of these patterns, but that is a mathematical pattern. And you can describe energy with numbers. The measure of the universe you can describe in numbers. So the Taoists sort of explore that on a very, very deep level. And the book became, yes, it is sort of a book of divination, so to speak, because it's sort of like the mirror of the universe. And at any one moment you're in the here and now. You're a pattern of all of the energetics and things that have happened to you in the past. You're now in the moment, but you're also going to the future. Yeah, so the whole thing about throwing the coins and so forth, it gives you the answer that you might be energetically experiencing in this moment.
But is it because you, throwing the things, connect yourself to this wider wisdom or wider logic that we don't really understand? Or is the book in itself the source?
No, the source is still you.
So it's a process of you connecting and... basically saying I'm giving up my judgment or my course of life and I'm going to consult.
No, it's complementary to that, because this book doesn't tell you what to do. This book gives you sort of like guidance to contemplate and intuitively extract the sort of the messages that the book's giving you. You still have to digest it and comprehend it and put it into your life. It's basically, this book is like consulting a good friend. Especially people use it, especially when they have a little bit of difficulty in deciding about certain direction in their life or their life goals.
There's now people who play the stock market by a system called gorilla, whatever. There's a gorilla, someone in a cage, and every morning they give him something, and if he takes it on the left, they buy and a thing like that. Seemingly the results over 2 years' time were better than the stock market.
Yeah,
that happened. But so how? Is this a piece of Chinese logic or a Chinese knowledge that is true, but we just don't know why?
Well, it is a book that's initially, when people buy it, they're first of all fascinated by it, but it's actually a book that's quite difficult to understand for the novice, in the sense that usually you need a little bit of guidance and a little bit of training.
Because it doesn't say yes or no, it says...
Yeah, it doesn't speak of yes or no.
It gives you these... I remember one time it said, watch out for your possessions or something like that. Hey, man, I lost my key. So it came true because I lost my key, and therefore. But it's sometimes hard to
extract the meaning.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's written in images, and it's not telling you sort of what to do. Like it's not the American system of the 7 steps too. It's not an analytical approach. The I Ching is like it's more to do with a cyclic approach. And it's this aspect of you are living in the moment. You're surrounded by the universe. This has the pattern of the universe in it. So if you want to tap in to some of the messages of the universe, you can use this book as a source of divination, so to speak, to extract some sort of purpose of what's happening to you in this time, and it helps to give you also a sense of the direction that you can take. So it's just like a good friend. But ultimately, you are the I Ching. This is just another book, so to speak. Ultimately, it's you, the person,
who has to use it, and first have to make the step of wanting to consult it, and then take the consultant. Whatever comes out of it in a specific way.
It's very interesting. The I Ching is one of the most published books in the world. It's something like the 4th or 5th most published book. So, people are quite fascinated. I think what happens is sometimes they find it very difficult, so they might give up on the I Ching, right? But it's certainly a book that, I think also you need a little bit of training and a little, like a teacher or guidance to just tap into, what do these lines mean, and what do the position mean, and so forth.
If I just take your last line, I said, you're describing Windows Millennium Edition.
Describing what?
The Windows Millennium Edition, one of the most published books in the world, of course.
Yeah, Wilhelm,
with
right.
all the lines that you have to understand.
Yeah. No, you don't have to stand at all like that, But some of us...
But was this the computer of the old
It
age?
was, yeah. And it's the binary computer language of the universe, basically. To measure the universe is just, yin and yang, or positive and negative. So it's
it's a cycle. We're coming back from this to maybe Windows.
Incredible patterns are in here, and that's the sort of the image, some of the imagery that we also use in Feng Shui.
Just very quickly to explain what you're doing here in Amsterdam, Rodger. You have a website that is fengshuiseminars.com. People can see what you do. There's a phone number in Amsterdam. You have given seminars. You do give seminars on what subject specifically?
There's ongoing seminars in Amsterdam with people here. Also, this year in Zurich in July, we're hosting a major Feng Shui conference with Chinese teachers and Indian teachers, and so people can go to the website and find out about the Zurich International Feng Shui Conference, and they can read about some articles both in the Chinese tradition and the Indian tradition called Vastu Sastra, and also I offer training programs for different locations as well.
Okay, so people can find you. And I have one last question: if I were to go to the moon, and I hear these days I can book myself into a Russian airplane.
That's right.
What side or what part of the moon should I go to, according to Feng Shui?
Go to the bright side of the moon, right?
To the bright side,
because it's a little bit spooky on the dark side of the moon.
Okay, but not on the top side or whatever. What would you say?
Always go for the middle.
Go for the middle. Shoot for the moon.
Yeah.
We hebben gesproken met Rodger Green over Feng Shui. U hebt het gezien, er is een website, hij geeft seminars en er was een heel aardig gesprek over iets wat heel oud is, maar de laatste tijd weer heel jong is, want de mensen doen er veel meer mee. Het is iets wat heel veel mensen gebruiken om een huis in te richten, om een huis te ontwerpen. Ik hoop dat de gemeente Amsterdam ook een beetje nadenkt, want wat je nu op het moment in Amsterdam ziet, al die verstopping is duidelijk geen Feng Shui. Maar als ze een beetje nadenken over de flow van de energie en hoe het allemaal beter kan, nou, dan kunnen we nog heel wat leren van die oude Chinezen, want daar komt het vandaan. Rodger, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.